This is a small review and a bit of an assistance on how to get the Baumr-AG SX82 to sort out just a few of the minor issues, mostly manufacturing issues. One in particular is the oil feed tends to block. Okay, we need to remove the side cover, chain, bar, and you need to remove these two nuts here and undo this screw slightly. Be very, very careful with this, as the componentry behind is plastic and extremely fragile. Once you removed all the side cover, the next thing to do is ensure it's got some oil and some fuel, and run it and check to see if oil will dribble out of this area here while the engine's running. That tells you whether or not the oil pump's working properly or has an issue with it. The next thing you do after that is remove this Allen key here and take off this tin guard. Okay, you've removed the tin guard, the stainless steel guard. That there is the oil feed. The pump sits behind the clutch. There's a C-clip here which has to be removed. That's quite easy, just use a screwdriver to pry it off, being careful it doesn't fly away. The oil will come out of that area there. This here is a little rubber bung and it's a little pinch tube. It allows vent to go back into the oil tank, otherwise the oil tank would create a vacuum. So be careful with that. Make sure it is there, it's quite important. So next thing, we remove the C-clip and the clutch outer cover. Okay, so there's the clutch drum. Inside the clutch drum is a small needle bearing. Make sure you oil that before putting it back together again. They often will gum up, and if they seize, then you'll get all sorts of problems like the clutch continuing to run and refusing to stop the chain. That's the C-clip, and there's a small washer just underneath that, so that's your sprocket. At this point we then use a hammer and a drift, being very careful, and you tap there with a hammer, sharp taps, and it should loosen off. If you have problems, then you may have to remove the spark plug and put some cord down inside the spark plug and rotate it over. This removes by going clockwise. The thread is a left-hand thread, so just be aware of that. Okay, so you'll actually remove it that way. Okay, so I've loosened that, so now it just unscrews. Simple as that, and you remove that, and underneath is the oil slinger. It's a threaded component. You would have found another one of those sitting inside the box. I think I had a spare one, and underneath that is the oil pump, which you can just see there. That's the oil feed pipe, and it runs up to there. This is your clutch band for the chain brake. And in order to remove the pump, you do have to release the band, but you don't have to remove it. Just be aware of that. You do not have to remove all of that mechanism that's behind there. Okay, this next part comes off relatively easy. Just comes straight up, and there it is. It's threaded, and inside there is another part of the pump mechanism, which is it's a helical sort of cut on it, and that turns the shaft of the pump, which runs along there. The adjuster for the pump is underneath here. Anti-clockwise is more oil, clockwise is less oil. It merely pushes the screw further along and changes how much it buckets oil from this area here. This is the inlet and goes straight into the tank from behind. In order to remove the oil pipe, you need to lift this up slightly, not too much, That'll give you more room to be able to manipulate that pipe. You then use something to lever that pipe upwards. It'll pivot in the rubber bushing here, and then that will come that way, and a little bit of wriggling, and you'll end up with the pipe out. The problem I had with mine was a piece of wood dust. In the end, I think it was wood dust, it could have been manufacturing metal, I don't really know, but I had to put it compressed, take this pipe out, compressed air, and it just blew out. Once I'd done that, it was able to, it ran beautifully after that. The oil pump itself, you undo that screw there, it lifts up and out of the way. It's a little bit of a fiddle because you've got the adjuster down here, but it comes out through there. Putting it back in, make sure that it seats on this part here, which goes into the oil tank. There's a rubber pipe underneath that, and it has to sit very neatly. So make sure that the distance all the way around is exactly the same, and then put those screws in just finger tight whilst holding it in position, and then finally wind it down to the right tension. You're probably wondering how the oil pump works. This is the oil gear. From what I can see is the fan pressure caused by the clutch spinning causes that to spin. As that spins, it turns the gear inside there, operates the pump, and there's a bucketing mechanism on the pump that just pulses oil out this direction, comes out there and feeds the chain. Time to put it back together. That goes in, ensure you oil the thread. Then the clutch goes on, and all the other components that you did remove in reverse order. Make sure you do oil that. Then I'll show you the modifications I did, because I think the reason I had wood dust all collecting around here, quite heavily around here, and the problem is the stainless steel guard that goes over the top's a very poor fit. A few little tips when putting it back together. Ensure that the band has been pushed down below the lugs. Then make sure you pull the lever back so that it snaps the band back into situation. This just goes on finger tight. It'll tighten itself up over time. Then the needle bearing that you've oiled, then the clutch goes over, then the sprocket, the washer, and then finally put the C-clip on. Very easy, only a few minutes to do it. Okay, here's one of the design issues. This tin plate, stainless steel plate, has an absolute terrible fit originally. The problem is that it's misshapen, been hammered, knocked down wrong. So what happens is this area up here was riding too high here, so it wasn't able to close this gap down here properly. So I was allowing all wood dust to go in that. So I just grabbed a hammer and a drift and I slowly tapped that down, which brought the angle tighter here. Then I put a little piece of compressible foam in that gap there. You could put just a line of silicone, would probably work exactly the same, and it just prevents anything from blowing backwards down there, ending up in here, and of course underneath that is your oil pump. If you block the oil pump, or dust gets into this gallery area here, which is what's probably happening, then that blocks the oil flow and no oil flow into your chain. So it's a fairly simple fix, just to get a hammer and a drift, tap that down very gently, not to break any cases. In the factory they probably just need to repress it, and they probably need to put a line of silicone under there before nesting it down. Maybe a line of silicone there and a line of silicone there, and even possibly along that, so that it seals off that area in general would actually be a perfect fix. Another problem I noticed too is when this stainless steel plate is in place, this rubber grommet here, which holds the oil pipe, was sitting too high. So I used a razor blade and I sliced it off flush with this surface. So the last couple of issues we've got is this here, which is the chain catcher, hangs off the bottom of the teeth here, is made a little bit thin and it bends. Not a great deal of a problem, but they could probably use a better quality steel or increase the thickness, and that would solve that problem. And then we get to the chain tension mechanism. Plastic gearbox. You can even see that when they've assembled it, they've damaged the thread slightly here. This is the pawl that moves the bar backwards and forwards. It could be modified by either changing that to metal so that it's a bit stronger, or changing this actual screw so that it's full length, drilling a hole in the end here and having a screwdriver hole at the end, so that when you do mess this up, at least then you could still adjust the chain. When you adjust the chain, just be very, very careful not to put too much pressure on the adjustment screw, which is that black screw there. Be very careful with it. Tighten these in until they're touching down, then loosen them back whilst wriggling the bar up and down until you get those at finger tight. Then very carefully adjust this in while wriggling the bar up and down until you get the right amount of clearance there. Do not force this screw. It's extremely fragile. That's the right amount. Then you hold the bar up at the end whilst tightening those down to full tension. So this is my Baumr-AG SX82. It was running well enough out of the box but wasn't producing enough power, so I had to screw the high-speed mixture screw in whilst the engine was running and warm. Under full throttle, screw it in until it's producing maximum RPM, then back it off until it sounds a little bit different. It's not quite producing the same amount of power, and at that point it should be the ideal mixture. Don't leave it at full RPM position, because that will run too lean and probably damage the engine. So high speed mixture, low speed mixture, idle screw. You will need a fairly small screwdriver though.